Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are going to talk about something that feels very rigid, computer science and linguistics. But it turns out the history of this field moves a lot less like a straight line of progress and a lot more like a giant swinging pendulum.
It really does. It just swings back and forth. You get these long stretches, decades really, where everyone is absolutely convinced that this one way is the only way to solve a problem.
Right.
And then, almost like clockwork, 20 years later, the whole field just rushes to the complete opposite side of the boat.
It's like fashion, but with algorithms. And to help us track this, we are digging into a really fascinating text today.
We are.
We're looking at Chapter 12 of Statistical Models for Natural Language Processing by Kenneth Church.
And Kenneth Church is a total heavyweight in this field. I mean, in this chapter, he's basically mapping out the entire history of how computers learn to process human language.
Right.
And his argument is pretty surprising. He suggests that for a long, long time, we didn't get better results because our computers got smarter. We got better results because we stopped trying to be smart and just started collecting massive amounts of data.
It sounds a little bit like cheating, doesn't it?
In a way, yeah. But as we're about to see, it's also incredibly effective.
So let's unpack this pendulum idea first. Church lays out this timeline that is it's wild to look at. He starts us off in the 1950s.
Right. The 1950s, so this is the era of empiricism. You're
Yeah.
thinking people like Claude Shannon, B.F. Skinner.
Okay.
And the vibe here was all about look at the data, look at the behavior, just measure what is actually there. They weren't trying to model the soul of the machine or anything.
No grand theories?
No, they were just modeling the statistics of the signal.
Okay, so that's the 50s. But then the 1970s roll around and boom, the pendulum swings hard. We get rationalism.
And in comes Noam Chomsky, Marvin Minsky. And this is a huge shift.
A total reversal.
The rationalists looked at the empiricists and basically said, you're just counting words, you're not understanding language. They believed language was way too complex to just observe.
So what did they want to do?
They thought you needed to, hard code the deep structures of grammar and logic right into the machine. They wanted the computer to understand the sentence, not just calculate probabilities.
They wanted to teach the computer why we say things, not just what we say.
Exactly. They were trying to build a mind.
But then, and this is the era Church really focuses on, the 1990s arrive, and that pendulum just slams right back to empiricism. Why the sudden U-turn?
Well, you have to look at the context. By the late 80s, the field was just stuck.
Stuck how?
They were banging their heads against what we now call AI-complete problems.
AI-complete. That sounds ominous.
It is. It's basically a term researchers use to say, look, to solve this one tiny specific problem, you first have to invent a fully conscious human-level artificial brain.
So in other words, we can't solve this yet.
Not even close. They were trying to solve these deep, long-distance dependencies in language, where a word at the start of a paragraph completely changes the meaning of a word at the end.
And the rule books just got too complicated.
Impossibly complicated. So in the 90s, researchers at IBM, at AT&T, they all just said, you know what? Let's stop trying to simulate the human brain. Let's just look at the data we have and pick the low-hanging fruit.
And Church has this great line about that shift. He writes, "We never imagined that the revival of empirical methods in the 1990s would be as successful as it turned out to be." They just wanted a seat at the table, but they ended up taking over the whole room.
They really, really did. And that success led to a completely different philosophy. It wasn't about elegance anymore.
It was about performance.
Just performance.
Which brings us to, I think, the most controversial part of this whole deep dive.
Oh, yeah.
This idea of quantity versus quality.
Yeah.
This vibe in the 90s that if you have enough data, you just don't need to be smart.
That's the magic sauce theory.
The magic sauce. I love that. And there's this brutal quote from Fred Jelinek, who was a huge figure in speech recognition. He famously said, "Whenever I fire a linguist, our system performance improves."
It's such a harsh quote, but it captures the feeling of the time perfectly. The idea was that linguistic rules, telling the computer what a noun or a verb is, were actually brittle. They broke too easily. Right. It was just better to feed the computer a million sentences and let it figure out the patterns on its own.
And then you have Banco and Brill in 2001, who took it even further. They basically said, fire everyone.
Right. Fire everyone and spend the money on data. They did this famous study where they compared different algorithms, and you'd think, a smarter, more complex algorithm, something some genius wrote, would do better than a dumb, simple one.
Sure, that makes sense. Better code, better results.
But they found that if you just kept adding more and more data, millions, billions of words. It didn't matter which algorithm you used.
No way.
They all just got better. The differences between the smart AI and the dumb AI, they just disappeared. The rising tide of data, as they called it, lifted all boats.
So the lesson was, don't think more, just read more.
Precisely. And we see this in modern examples, too. Church uses the Tirsic Q&A example, specifically the question, what is the highest point on Earth?
Okay, so if I'm a rationalist from the 1970s, I'm thinking, I need to teach the computer what highest means, what Earth is, what a mountain is.
Right, geography, the whole works. You're trying to build a reasoning engine.
Yeah.
But the empiricist of the 2000s says, I don't need to know what Earth is. I just need to scan a billion web pages. And if you type that question into Google, the answer, Mount Everest, is right there on the first page.
It's not intelligence.
Not at all. It's pattern matching. It's just finding the string of text that looks like the answer.
It feels a little hollow, though, doesn't it? Like, sure, it got the answer, but does it know the answer?
Yeah.
Or is it just a parrot with a library card?
That is the big criticism. And Roger Moore pointed this out back in 2003. He warned that while this method works, it's incredibly inefficient.
Inefficient how?
He estimated that for a machine to learn the same amount of language as a human child, it needs fantastic amounts of data. We're talking 2 or 3 orders of magnitude more data than a human ever needs.
So a kid listens to their parents for a couple of years and speaks fluent English.
Yeah.
A computer needs to read the entire internet just to figure out where the commas go.
Exactly. We are compensating for a lack of true understanding with an absolute avalanche of data.
So let's get into the mechanics of how this dumb data processing actually works. Because the source material spends a lot of time on something called Shannon's noisy channel model.
This is fundamental. This goes all the way back to Claude Shannon in 1948 at Bell Labs.
Right.
And you have to remember, Shannon wasn't trying to solve AI or build a robot. He was trying to fix phone lines.
So the setup is, you have a message, let's call it input or SDL.
Yeah.
You send it through a channel, like a copper wire, but the wire is staticky and bad. That's the noisy channel. So what comes out the other end is the output, the dollar, but it's all corrupted.
And Shannon's goal was simple. How do I look at this messy output and guess what the original input was?
How do you do it?
You do it by calculating probabilities. What is the most likely message that would get twisted into this specific mess?
And this model became the hammer for every single nail in the 1990s. The most obvious one is spelling correction.
Oh, it's a perfect application. Think about when you type. You are the input. You want to type the word adjusted, but your fingers, the noisy channel, they slip and you type adjusted without the J.
So the computer sees adjusted. That's the corrupted signal.
Right. And it uses a model like the one Kernighan built in 1990. It looks at 2 things. First, the channel model. How likely is it that you would accidentally drop a J? They built this by analyzing huge piles of typo stats from the Associated Press.
They actually counted how often people swap letters.
They did. They built what's called a confusion matrix. It's a grid that shows, how often A gets swapped for E. Turns out that happens a lot. So the computer knows that dropping a J is a plausible mistake. Then it looks at the language model. And this is just, how common is the word adjusted in English versus, say, the word dusted?
So it sees adjusted. It thinks, well, adjusted is a common word, and people often miss the J.
Right.
But dusted is also a word.
Right. But in the example Church gives, the probability for adjusted comes out to nearly 100%, and dusted is effectively 0 in that context. It's simply guessing the original input based on the noise.
Okay, that makes perfect sense for spelling. You're fixing a broken word. But here's where it gets really, really funny.
I know where you're going.
Church talks about how they started abusing this model for things that aren't actually noisy channels, like part of speech tagging.
This is such a great example of that twist.
Yeah.
So in this model, we have to assume that deep down in your brain, you aren't thinking in words.
Okay.
They're thinking in parts of speech.
You think.
Noun, verb, adjective.
So my brain just emits a noun signal.
But when you try to speak, that pure signal gets corrupted by your mouth and comes out as actual words.
So words are just corrupted grammar.
In the math, yes. The computer's job is to decode the words back into the original parts of speech. It sounds completely absurd, but mathematically it works beautifully.
But the best one, the one that really made me laugh, is how they applied this to machine translation. Church calls this the Made in America model.
This is a classic joke in the field. So imagine you want to translate French into English. The noisy channel approach assumes that French people don't actually exist.
Wait, what?
The model assumes that French speakers are actually just English speakers. They think in English.
Yeah.
But when they open their mouths, their noisy channel is so bad, so distorted, that the English comes out sounding like, well, French.
That is unbelievably American-centric.
It is. It just assumes French is corrupted English. So the computer's job isn't to translate, it's to decrypt the French back into the original English.
And the crazy thing is, it worked.
For a long time, this statistical approach beat the linguists who were trying to actually teach the computer French grammar. It's wild.
It really shows how you can use math to solve a problem, even if your underlying assumption that French people are just distorted Americans is completely and utterly wrong.
Exactly. It's pragmatic. It doesn't care about the truth. It only cares about the output.
So that's recognizing things, fixing the noise. But the chapter shifts gears to talk about discrimination. This is when we want to sort things into piles, and we have a fantastic mystery to solve here. The Federalist Papers.
This is the classic case study. It comes from Mosteller and Wallace in 1964.
For those who don't know, the Federalist Papers were 85 essays written in the 1780s to support the U.S. Constitution.
Right.
They were written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. But they all signed them with a pseudonym, Publius.
Right. And for a long time, historians knew who wrote most of them, but there were about 12 essays where nobody was sure. Was it Hamilton or was it Madison?
And their styles were really similar, right?
Very similar. They were both lawyers, both politicians from the same era. It wasn't like one was writing poetry and the other was writing legal briefs.
So how do you possibly tell them apart?
You use Bayesian statistics? Mosteller and Wallace treated the documents as bags of words. They didn't care about the arguments or the grammar at all.
Just counting words.
Just counting the frequency of specific words.
And they found a smoking gun.
They did the word upon.
Upon.
It turns out Alexander Hamilton just loved the word upon. In the essays we know he wrote, he used it 381 times. Madison.
How many?
He almost never used it, only 7 times.
Wow. That is a huge difference.
It is. So you can calculate what's called a likelihood ratio. If you see the word upon in a disputed text, the odds that it's Hamilton just skyrocket it. And they found about 30 words like this, whilst enough.
So you just multiply the odds for every word.
You multiply them all, and the math gives you a clear winner.
And it turned out to be Madison for all 12 disputed essays, right?
Correct. The math solved a history mystery that humans couldn't.
But, and there is always a but in these deep dives, this method, which is called naive Bayes, has a really dangerous flaw. And this is where we get to the cautionary tale.
Yes. The flaw is right there in the name, naive. It makes a very, very strong assumption called the independence assumption.
Okay, so unpack that for us. What does it mean to assume independence?
It means the math assumes that every word or every feature is completely unrelated to every other word. It assumes that using the word upon has absolutely no connection to using the word constitution.
But in language, words are totally connected.
Yeah.
If I say new, there's a really good chance the next word is York.
Exactly. But naive Bayes just ignored that. And because it treats every piece of evidence as a separate new coin flip, it multiplies the odds together. So if you have 3 clues that each give you 100 to 1 odds, you multiply them 100 times 100 times 100.
Yeah, 1,000,000 to 1 odds.
Right. You get these outrageous, wildly confident scores. The model says there is a 1 in a million chance I'm wrong, but that confidence is fake. It's built on a lie because the evidence wasn't actually independent.
And this is where the chapter takes a really serious turn. Church connects this statistical flaw, this bad math, to the 2008 financial crisis.
This is the so what moment. It is not just about counting words. In the lead up to the housing crash, banks were bundling mortgages into these bonds, those CDOs, collateralized debt obligations.
Right, the things that blew up the whole economy.
And the risk models for those bonds assumed that mortgage defaults were independent events.
What does that mean?
They basically thought, just because this person in Florida defaults on their house, it has no bearing on whether this person in California will default.
Which sounds kind of reasonable if you think about them as separate coin flips.
But they were not separate. They were correlated. When the economy crashes or interest rates go up, everyone is more likely to default at the same time.
So the independence assumption was just wrong.
Catastrophically wrong. The model said these bonds were super safe, 1,000,000 to 1 odds against failing because they treated the loans as independent. But when that dependency kicked in, the market crash, everything failed at once.
As Church says, it would be pretty crazy to bet the farm on independence.
And yet we do it all the time in data science. We assume variables are separate just to make the math easy, but reality is messy and everything is connected.
So how do we fix this? The source material moves on to talk about ways to handle these numbers better, specifically with ranking and weighting.
Well, first you have to decide what's even important. In search engines, we use something called term weighting. If you search for the ard, var, the word the is useless.
Right, it's everywhere.
It's in every document. The word aardvark, on the other hand, is rare. It has high information value.
It's the IDF score, right? Inverse document frequency.
Yes. If a word appears in every document on the internet, its IDF score is basically 0. If it appears in only a few, it has a really high score. It's a way of telling the computer, listen to the rare stuff.
And then you have this constant battle between precision and recall. I always get these mixed up.
Okay, think of it this way. You're fishing for relevant documents. Precision is. Of the fish you caught, how many were actually the kind you wanted? Did you catch mostly trash or mostly tuna?
Okay, that makes sense.
And recall is, did you catch all the tuna in the entire ocean? Or are there still 1,000 relevant ones swimming around that you missed?
And you can't easily have both.
It's a trade-off. If you want 100% precision, just catch one fish that you are absolutely certain about, but your recall will be terrible.
Right.
If you want 100% recall, just drain the whole ocean. You get all the tuna, but you also get all the trash, so your precision just tanks.
So to deal with all these trade-offs and that 1,000,000 to 1 odds problem, the field moved towards something called logistic regression.
Right. Logistic regression is a discriminative model. Unlike naive Bayes, it doesn't make those wild independence assumptions. It learns how to properly weight different features.
And Church uses a college admissions example here, predicting if a student gets into grad school based on their GPA.
This is a great example of what's called calibration. If you look at the raw data, a student with a 2.2 GPA had a 0% chance of getting in. A student with a 4.0 had about a 42% chance. Logistic regression fits a nice smooth S-curve to that data, so it gives you a realistic probability, like you have a 30% chance, instead of a crazy 1,000,000 to 1 score.
But Church warns about a trap here, too. He talks about insignificant features.
This is the danger of just throwing everything into the blender. If you give the model the student's GPA, their GRE score, their shoe size, and their favorite color, the model might find a weird pattern in shoe size just by coincidence.
Oh, look, people with size 10 shoes always get in.
Exactly. That's called overfitting. The model is just memorizing the data. It's not actually learning from it. If you add too many useless variables, insignificant features, you completely ruin the model's ability to predict the future. You have to be disciplined about what you feed it.
So bring it all back to the beginning. We've gone from the rationalists of the 70s to the empiricists of the 90s who just wanted more data. We learned that treating French as noisy English actually somehow works.
And that assuming independence can crash the global economy?
It's been quite a journey. So where does Church see us going now? The chapter ends on a bit of a reflective note.
He reflects on that low-hanging fruit. Remember, the shift to data only happened because the hard problems, like true understanding and long-distance dependencies, were just too hard. So we picked the easy apples.
With n-grams and statistics?
Exactly, and it worked. We got Google, we got Siri, we got translation.
We did.
Yeah.
But Church's point is that the old problems are still there. The low-hanging fruit has been picked over. We are getting better and better at the statistics, but we still haven't solved those rationalist problems of deep structure and real meaning. So the pendulum, it might be swinging back.
Church seems to think so. He suggests that the next generation might have to go back to the 1970s ideas, rationalism, structure, rules, but combine them with the massive amounts of data we have now. We can't just count words forever.
Right.
Eventually, the computers have to start thinking again.
That's a fascinating thought. That to move forward, we kind of have to go back.
That's the nature of the pendulum.
So for everyone listening, the next time you type a search into Google or use autocorrect, just remember, it's probably not understanding you. It's just making a very, very good statistical guess based on a billion other people who made the same mistake.
And maybe ask yourself, what independence assumptions are you making in your own life? Are you betting the farm on things being separate that are actually deeply connected?
That is a scary thought to end on. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you on the next swing of the pendulum.
Good.